start the record. Hold on, give it a second. Waiting
Yep.
for indication that we're live.
And we're live
We're going. You're good to go.
here at Times Square. All right. Welcome to the channel, guys. Thanks for tuning in. And today we are going to be talking about Rarity. And Rarity, when it comes to custom design, really mostly only applies for set design. Rarity in the custom world, it's hard to determine rarity when you're not designing the set. But there are a few things you can go by, and we're going to go over those right now. So, rarity is mostly about complexity. You know, comprehension complexity is about understanding what the card does. Can you read it and know how it works? There's board complexity. Okay, that is about understanding how the card interacts with all the other cards on the field, in play, in the game. And do you understand the relationship and impact between it and the other cards, especially between it and cards that are public, on the battlefield. And then there's strategic complexity, which is about understanding the implications a card has on advancing the game and the game state. And do you understand what role this card will have in helping you win the game? Because that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to win the game. Rarity is also based on wordiness. Wizards doesn't really like very wordy cards. I think 9 lines of text is like the absolute max for most cards under rares, under rarity. As far as rarity is concerned, like commons and uncommons, they try not to go past 9 lines of text. So the more wordy it is, the more likely the card is going to be not common or a higher rarity. Um, there's also the size of the effect. Cards can have a wide range of effects, from a tiny little one-time effect to a gigantic, game-changing, battlefield-clearing wrath effect. So it all depends on what the effect is doing in the game and to the game.
Right.
There's
The,
yeah.
the
So
other thing
there's
to
the
add
impact
there
of
is that
yeah.
the other important thing to know about rarity is that, and as Kevin already mentioned, rarity is like to just piggyback even further off what he said there. Rarity is for set design, but not just set design, because in theory, you could design a set that's nothing but rares. You could do that, but realistically speaking, as many people have pointed out, particularly Mark Rosewater likes to bring this up a lot in his design articles, that Magic is meant to be played in sealed and limited, so or sealed and draft. So it's a limited game. And when you're playing limited, that's where rarity comes in, because there's certain cards. Um, when you're designing your set, you would say, what cards would I like to show up more in the packs, and what cards would I like to not show up very often? Because then it's a good way to determine which ones you want to push towards common and which ones you want to push towards rare. Um, like he mentioned,
Rarity is about distribution,
yeah. So
essentially.
it's he also mentioned that like you wouldn't put, like when it comes to designing a keyword, like Kevin has infiltrate on the screen there. You don't want any keyword that can't show up at every rarity. So if you've
Right.
created this keyword that's super oppressive or super good, and you're like, oh, but I justified it because I put it on a rare. Well, as he pointed out, as Mero pointed out in his articles and in his podcast, you want anyone to crack a pack of your set and immediately know what is your set about. And so if you're like, well, I only put infiltrate at rare, well, then they're not going to understand that infiltrate is one of the set mechanics. It's got to show up everywhere,
Right.
and particularly you want it more to show up more often at common. And oddly enough, is
Right.
that you want it to show up more often at common than you do at rare, because again,
Yeah.
this is what you're trying to show off for the set. And like, I mean,
Right.
again, think of a an ability like landfall. Imagine if landfall only happened at rare. Like
Right.
it probably wouldn't. Yes, you could make a really push design like Omnath, like the latest Omnath, but would
Right.
that indicate like, oh, well, this is the land set? It's like, oh,
Right.
I wouldn't have gotten that from this one card. You know,
Right.
um,
Just the
so it's important to make sure that your abilities, as good as you want to make them, remember that your ability has to be shared within all rarities. And if you can't do that, then you've designed it wrong. You know.
right. Right. And this set in particular that I'm showing it here has a lot of ability words. So ability words are a little bit easier to work with because these are already existing abilities in the game, and I'm just putting them at different rarities and that they usually already exist at. So ability words are usually a little bit easier to deal with than words. So I brought back raid. I've got infiltrate. Cunning is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, which is from the Khan's block. Um, that was the red, white, and blue mechanic. Been a while since I looked at this board.
I'm trying to find right now. I have a great example of where I screwed up a design here when it comes to designing a keyword mechanic. And I can't seem to find this. I know I have it. Oh, this is exactly.
Yeah, keyword mechanics are very hard to out.
Probably in this set. Let's see here.
Here's a different set. I have like 9 sets, so maybe just here's a different one. Right, so Omen, this is actually very similar to Portel. I designed this several years ago. This was 2017. So Omen says, rather than cast this card from your hand, you may pay the cost and exile it. At the beginning of your next upkeep, cast it without paying its mana cost. So it's essentially a one-turn suspend. So similar to Portal and using exile and paying a lower cost. So paying 1, exiling it. The creature doesn't get haste like suspend does, but it's not being in exile as long as suspend. You're getting it for a lower cost. It's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 commons. So it's on more commons than it is uncommons or rares.
All right, I'm gonna switch over for just a second so I can show you this. This would be example of like a bad. I know you can't see it right now, Kevin, but I'm sharing it with them. This would be an example of a bad ability because notice it says when this comes into play, you may gain control of target creature with converted mana cost less than this creature's cost. This creature's mana cost until the end of your next turn. Well, the problem with this is that yes, I haven't set it at uncommon, but even at 4, well, I'm not getting anything that great. So it means that in order to make this ability good, I have to put it on higher and higher mana cost things. Well, the downside with that is that the higher the mana cost I go, the less playable this card becomes. So, this is a very poorly designed mechanic. Like, I don't want to be playing a 9-drop creature just so I can take 1 creature for a single turn. Like, that doesn't really help me. Like, so yeah, this is just a really, really bad, poorly designed keyword that putting it at different levels doesn't make it any better. Like, so bear that in mind,
Right.
that when you're designing something, like I said, it needs to be able to show up at every single level. Otherwise, it's not useful.
Right.
Whereas, like, if you look at like what Kevin's showing you right here with Omen, oh, he changed it. Go back to that one. As you can see that, like, even at common, this ability still works well, and it's not overpowered, but you can see that how, like, oh, but if I bumped up that Omen just a little bit bigger, I could get a splashier effect, and then that makes you want to
Right.
put it on a rare, you know. So like, you could put like Omen 6, but it has like this a massively good ability, you know, um, because why not? Like, it's at that point, if you're putting it on a rare. And remember, this is a card that you don't want to show up very often. Um, it's why, again, like, let's take this directly into where most people would most often come in contact with this. If you're playing in constructed, right? Commander being the most popular form of Magic right now. Um, the rarity of your cards in Commander does not matter. It's every card in your deck could be a common. It doesn't matter. The point is that because there's nothing in the game that says, like, rarity matters when it comes into play or when you're casting it or anything like that. So remember, when you're designing,
I mean, it doesn't include, but
yeah, when you're designing cards towards rarity, remember to always keep in mind that we're not talking about constructed. Like, it doesn't matter how this affects constructed. It matters how it affects limited. Which is how we get cards like, and many of you are familiar with this on the Facebook page, where someone will post a card and it's a rare, and somebody like, oh, but it's broken if you use this card. Yeah, that's in constructed, but it's not broken in my format, which is limited. That card that you mentioned, that's not in my set. Like, I was very smart to not put that in my set. I'm just putting this card in, and yes, this word works well. Because, I mean,
yeah, it's like,
let's
I
be
understand there's
honest.
an issue.
Rosewater has mentioned this many, many times. If they specifically designed cards to make sure that they weren't broken with any card ever printed in Magic's history, then they just have to stop making cards.
Mm.
Because there's always going to be that one that slips through the gaps, and you're just like, whoops, we didn't see that coming, because who would have thought this one card interacted with this ability that well? So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So, here we are seeing this mechanic kind of progress up in rarity. It's like, okay, now we see a prison effect. It's still a little bit of a higher cost, but it's still less than the actual mana cost. And then there's another one. Again, higher cost for mana cost. Just only one less for woman cost. And then you just get an index card. Well, it's more of a what's the name of the card? Predict. You predict the card, then you get it, and then going up in rarity again. Okay, again, there's a battlefield.
Kevin, you're drifting away from your mic a little bit, so we're losing you.
Alright, sorry. So this one says when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, destroy target creature. So get a nice murder effect for 4 mana 3/3, but you have to wait. But that's not bad. If you pay 5 mana and you get a 3/3 flying, you get the same effect. So it's a discount, but you have to wait. And it's all about, like, this ability is more about your available mana that you have. It's like, okay, if I don't have 5, I can pay 4. I'm fine with waiting this. So, as Jason just said, the effect on the limit. Because some cards are designed for most cards are designed for the limited. Those cards want to be lower in rarity. Some cards are designed for constructed and cause problems in the limit. And those cards want to be higher. And the cards that are crucial to make Limited work will push toward common, and the cards disrupted to limited will push towards rare or mythic. There's also in design, sometimes there's narrow effects. You think it's an interesting idea, but some cards are broad in their applications, and some cards are very narrow. You don't want to be too niche with a design.
And here's the thing that people forget:
narrow cards push away from
designing their sets is that, remember, when it comes to, I think we had this challenge once on the Facebook page, but when it comes to designing things like commons, narrow scope is what makes commons playable.
Right.
Not every common has to be good. There's a reason why they put a grizzly bear in every color in every set. It's like, because sometimes you just need a 2/2 for 2, so that way on turn 2 I have a creature to play. You don't have to be like, well, my 2/2 doesn't have an ability. That's fine. Like, that's overly fine. Like, you don't have to have some sort of super complex way of fetching lands. You don't need that either. A simple rampant growth will be just fine. I can't tell you how many times I've been, in a draft where I'm shocked when someone passes me a land tutor that's like, oh, it's, even something as simple as like lay of the land. It's like, why would you not take this? Like, yes, it's simplistic, and if I'm not playing multiple colors, then it doesn't really help me mana fix, but it's still mana fetch. And it's simple. It's one. You can do it on turn 1. So it's, bear that in mind, that like you need efficient cards in your set. Not every card can be a bomb, and that's, again, it's something that now this is a place where I do disagree with Mark Rosewater, where he says not every rare has to be good. You have to have bad rares. I disagree with that
Right.
philosophy 100%. Like, I don't think there needs to be bad rares. Now, I think that you are in every set going to get unplayable rares, but that's a different subject. Mudhole, for example, is a bad rare, right? It's like, it's not just unplayable, it's also terrible. And there's no reason that should have been a rare. And and to say that the simple excuse is because there needs to be bad rares in your set to make it work in limited,
Right.
I disagree with that, because I can't tell you how frustrating it is when you're drafting and you open your pack and your rare is pointless. Like that's, and it's different. Again, I'm drawing a distinction between playable and worthless. Many tier 1 drafters or upper end drafters will tell you, sometimes you open a pack and in there is that rare land, but that rare land doesn't help you. So, like, going back to like Ravnica draft, frequently I would pass lands. Like, oh, it's a dual land, I'll pass it. It's not in my colors. Just go ahead and get rid of it, because I need good cards. But that's not a bad rare. That's a good rare that is unplayable. But again, compare that directly to something like Mudhole, where you're like, or Greater Gargadon. It's like, this is terrible, and this shouldn't be on a rare. Like, just because, as Kevin mentioned earlier, just because it's complex doesn't mean it should be a rare. Like, there's ways to put complex cards on commons or put them on uncommons without wasting that rare slot. And usually the easiest thing to do is just up the mana cost. You can see here that, like, the one that Kevin has on the screen right now, this Velvet Plate Scale, at 2 and a red, it's okay as a common. It's okay. If it was a single red, that would not be a common. That's a rare.
Right.
And it's the same card.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to change the card to move it from common to uncommon to rare. Usually all you have to do is change the mana cost. And don't make cards like Mudhole.
If this is double red, yeah. Like, if this was double red, it could probably be an uncommon.
Yeah.
Single, yeah, it's used with 1 mana, it could probably be a rare. So it's all about adjusting costs, abilities, and other you can adjust.
And Mark Rosewater has brought that up numerous times. That, like, you know, he works in R&D, and there is a separate entire department that puts the mana cost on the cards. They just design them, and another department puts the mana cost on there. Well, unfortunately, you have to do both jobs. You have to wear both hats. It's, you know, the fun part is designing the text box. The not fun part is designing everything else. Like, creating the creature type, putting the name. As I mentioned numerous times, I'm terrible with names. I cannot name cards. Like, I'm like, I would not do well with that job. So, but yeah, it is something that you have to learn how to do. That, like, you have to learn how to appropriately cost it. Again, the text box part, that's the easy part. That's the fun part. But the rest of it takes a little time to learn how to do it correctly.
And speaking of complexity, here's one of my favorite overly complex cards that I've made. It's basically a variant of Chains of Mephistopheles, but instead of milling the player, that player has to take one damage. So if the player were to draw a card except the first card they draw during their draw step each turn, that player discards a card. Instead, if that player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If the player doesn't discard a card this way, the draft goes lose one damage to that player. So if Chains of Mephistopheles didn't confuse you enough already, here's a new version of it. It's just,
if you didn't want to kill yourself the first time, well, maybe you will now.
It's like, okay, I drew a card. Stop. Is this the first card you draw in your turn? Is it even your turn? So it's like you have to just really be aware of the game state and where you are. So this is an example of what a mythic should look like because of just pure complexity. So I had to share that. I'm actually very proud of that. I love Chains of Mephistopheles. I actually made a flow chart to help people actually understand the card because this is the ninth set that I'm working on currently and brewing this. So as you see, I've actually got the color codes still on some of the cards. So the abilities, looking around here, are Tactician. Whenever this creature blocks or becomes blocked, you get an ability.
Wait, leave it there.
Raid.
Just for real quick here. So, what Kevin has done here, and this is actually literally what they do in card design. Notice the title there. It's Green Uncommon 1. All right. There actually are, if you look it up, there are set breakdowns as to how many of each card are supposed to be in a normal set. And thanks to the internet, now if you can, like I usually start, if I'm going to design a set, I start with an idea of how many cards I want in my, because obviously if you just start designing cards, your set will be infinitely huge, all right, or infinitely small, right? So what you do is look up, let's say you want a small set. You're like, okay, well, this small set only has 200, as in the case of Kevin's set, 219 cards. All right. Well, there are guides that you can look up that will tell you, like, how many of those should be common, how many of those should be uncommon, how many of those should be rare, and how many of those should be mythic. And then once you've got that, you can go through and put in things like this where, okay, well, I'm just going to label them, green uncommon 1, green uncommon 2, green uncommon 3, green common 1, green common 2, green rare 1, green rare 2. You just keep doing it like that, and then you fill it in, It makes your job way easier.
And this set is still, this set is still actually in progress. I don't even have all the cards made for it yet, as far as card codes. But Magic Set Editor is great because you can go into things like statistics and go into card color for your first section and then rarity for your second, so you can see what your breakdowns are. So, okay, I've got 17 cards that come in white, blue, black, red, and green. So across the board, I've got 17 commons in each color. So I've got 12 uncommons in each color across the board. And then how many cards in artifacts? How many cards in land? 24 land, basic lands. Or the lands, they come in. 6 common lands. 24 basic lands, right? And then 5 lands that uncommon. So, yeah, as you can see, I only have very few cards at rare right now. So to grow quite large, it's going to be probably like a 350 card set by the time it's all said and done. But yeah, this is what a design skeleton should look like for a set while you're working on it. It's like, okay, before I get a name for this, it's going to be called Green Uncommon 1. And this one has a temporary name that I can't make it because I struggle with naming as well. I said, okay, I can at least come up with a name for this one. So this one, this is kind of like my post-apocalyptic plane here. It's, there's a lot of colorless matters, a lot of waste matters, and basically the story is that there's this big wave of Aether energy in the multiverse that got released, and it basically impacted onto this plane, and it just warped the plane and changed how the mana. It basically created wastes on the plane. The plane had to adapt, and the beings had to adapt to the adjustments of the plane. It's basically fallout, post-apocalyptic, and they have to figure out how to adjust and adapt and survive.
And you know what? What's also great here, you can even just to circle back to a comment we made earlier. This is also a spot that you can also put in your title, like green uncommon set mechanic 1. And that way you know that, like, oh, I'm making sure that my set mechanics are showing up at the level that they should, and in the level that I want them to. Because again, sometimes you forget and you realize that you forgot to put your set mechanic on. Like, I was smart enough, I put it on a bunch of commons, I put it on the rares, but I forgot to put it on the uncommons. Whoops! Now I have to go back and redesign a bunch of my uncommons. You can solve that by putting it right in the title, and work from, and again, like the good teachers that we are, we're gonna circle back to a topic we already discussed, which is top down and bottom up design. All right, this is why you don't start from the name or start from the picture, because I need to make sure that I have an uncommon that has raid, right? And if I'm focusing on the picture of the name, I might forget that this card has to have raid, right? I've only had, as far as my uncommons go, I've only had raid show up on one uncommon. Then I screwed everything up, all right, because I was so busy focusing on my artwork instead of on my card design. So this is why we do bottom up design. We design everything, starting with the text box all the way up, and the last thing you usually want to do, usually what the last thing you do is you put the card art on. Usually I do it I flip the last 2 steps. I put the card art on, then I put the name on, because I hopefully get a name based on the artwork.
Somehow it's inspired.
Yeah. So, like it's really helpful, again, to like follow this skeleton here, and like I said, even going as far as listing your mechanics on the skeleton name to make sure that you're getting what you need. And again, going back to that one that I showed you earlier, that domination effect, I realized that after I finished the set, domination only appeared on 2 cards in the entire set. So I'm like, and because I was so busy designing from the top down, that I forgot that I wanted to show off this set mechanic. So, it turned into a complete disaster, which, as I've mentioned, I think I've mentioned this before, it was the first set I ever designed. It was absolutely awful. Going back and looking at it, from the perspective of having now played for 20 plus years, you look at it and go, wow, what was I thinking? Like, this set is terrible.
Right.
Like, so, and just assume that, as safety goes, like, just assume your first set's probably going to be bad. you know. But that's what we're
Yeah.
here for, guys. Is that that's why you're in the Facebook group, so that way,
Good
hopefully,
try.
your first set isn't bad. You know,
Yeah.
take the advice of the people on
And
the set on the forum.
right, exactly. And speaking of, actually, I don't think we've actually shared the Facebook group with our viewers here. Anyone who is tuning in who isn't part of the group. Alright, so this is the Magic Set Editor Alliance. We're about custom magic card creation and design.
So yes, if you're on Facebook, you probably should be in our group.
Yeah, you can find us. You can request to join. We do have to answer a couple questions. We have several weekly contests that I run. It's kind of crazy. We have a art design contest, so we provided an artist and we design a card based on the artist. A main design contest. Anything you want to come up with. We have a commander tuning contest. And then we have a wacky Wednesday off the wall outside of the box. Make it fun design contest. So that's the group. What's anything else we want to discuss as far as design? So we actually want to just recently brought a carbon here. Here's the radical social idea. Redeeming cards with the special code and put the card in. So based on the Harbinger cycle from well, anything else you want to mention,
No,
talk about?
I think we've covered it pretty well here. This I know it's a short episode, but I think we've pretty much gone over everything we need to go over.
I think we pretty much hit the nail on the head. Do you want to kind of explain what splashy is?
Yeah, that's fine.
Like, splashy to me is like, will this card get players excited about playing it in the set? To me, that's like, oh, this card is splashy. It's gonna make an impact. I want to play with it.
We have to make sure that we draw a distinction between flashy, as in like, you know, obviously we now know that they're like set cards, like you know, Uro was designed to push Theros, but not the difference in that word is splashy. There's also splashable cards, which is entirely different.
Right.
If do you have one with a single
Right. As
mana
far as
cost
color.
in it? If you pull up one with a single mana cost in it, there,
Right.
it's not this one. Pull one up there. Trying to look there. Go to Frenzied Betrayal. There it is. So see how Frenzied Betrayal only has one red in the slot. That means this is a splashable card because I can play it in a color other than red. You know, I can be red, blue, or red, white,
Easy.
and I don't have to worry about being too devoted to mana cost. So keep that in mind when you're designing your cards as well.
And the more red, the more color of a single color you have makes it harder to splash other colors. It makes it more likely you're going to be.
Yeah, it kind of forces you more into that color, which means, you know, if you're drafting a set, like sometimes it's possible, like when you're again, everything we're talking about today is about drafting. When I'm drafting a card, I might throw a single, like if I'm blue red, you know, like I might throw a single black card into my deck if it's splashable and good, like that Decapitate is probably a removal spell, you know. Well, I'm a little short on removal, but I did draft this Decapitate. I'll splash black just for this one solid card, especially if it's like a bomb rare. I can't tell you how many times like I've splashed for a bomb rare. You know, it's like, well, my goal is to play green black, but if I hit my red card, I can kill them with this red card. And it's worth throwing in that one or two
Right.
mountains, but like you can't splash, you know that guy Deepwood Cullblade. That's not splashable if I'm in white green. I can't splash for Deepwood Cullblade because at black I'm devoting too much mana to it. I'm gonna hurt my other
Right.
colors at that point.
Right. And then run too many swamps it's going to take away from everything else I'm trying to do. Right. So it's the other type of splash. But splashy is just about how well you think the card is going to set. And some lower rarity splashy cards can be things that are simple and very functional.
And yeah, it doesn't have to be
I think
rare
it's just
to be splashable, as Kevin just mentioned there. For those of us who remember when they finally brought Lightning Bolt back into Standard, like that was the card they sold the set on, and it was a common. So they're like, hey, remember Lightning Bolt? Here it is, and that got people really excited for the set because, hey, it's Lightning Bolt coming back into Standard at common. That's a great draft card.
Yeah. Yep. And then when Opt came back, I loved playing back in Odyssey. And when that card came back, we were like, oh, this is such a great card. I mean, because Ponder and Beard Dana are restricted in several other formats. So it's like, okay, this is it's an old card that they're making new that I can get access to. And all right, it's a great card. It's very simple and functional and does exactly what I need to do. Yeah, there's a few set abilities that are like stuck at common that you'll always see at common. But yeah, I think that's just about everything that we need to go over. Yeah, a little bit of a short episode this week, but thanks for tuning in and listening in.